Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create some FK controllers. So basically, IK is this. All right, let's go to rigging, IK. So IK is this. When you click on this and you click on this, and it stands for inverse kinematics. The idea here is this. It was designed for robotics. So basically, let's say you have a tire and you want a robot to be able to put the lug nuts on it, right, on the tire, on like say the rim of the tire. Well, it's really hard to tell. Like if I was trying to get this arm, oh come on, middle mouse button, there it goes. If I was trying to get this arm and I want it to be in a very specific, let's say I want to touch this point here, I'd have to rotate this over, then go to the next joint, then rotate that, and be like, oh, that's not quite right. Rotate this down, be like, oh no, go back up here, then rotate this around, and then rotate this farther and down, and then rotate this, and then rotate this down this way, and then take this one. It'd be really hard to tell it to rotate joint by joint to try and get into a position, as opposed to doing this, where I could say, give it an XYZ coordinate, like this, put that there, and then the other, this isn't a great example because it's messed up, but the other joints, what it'll do is that instead of going forward, FK, forward kinematics, so here, 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 moving down the joint chain, instead it does inverse kinematics, where you move here, and then it goes backwards and finds where the other joints need to be so that this joint may be there. And that's basically IK. Now that's really good for some things. So for instance, I want the feet to stay here, right? So when I go to move my body, it's good because that way I can say this foot should be here. So regardless of how this is moving, that foot should always be there. And that works really well because you can kind of do it like that. But the thing is, normally when we're moving an arm and what have you, it does this. So sometimes IK is good for that, but if I was trying to animate this arm, let's say he's walking, and I animate here and then here, it's going to be very linear. See how this doesn't look natural? Okay? That doesn't look good, right? What would be much better is to actually leave it as FK. So I could swing this back and forth. See how you get a nice arc, just as it actually is. So IK is not actually going to work that well in this situation. You gotta undo to like, okay, good. It's not actually gonna work very well in that situation. So it should be relatively easy. One thing we don't want to do is actually animate on the joints. We want to have controllers, so a lot easier to work with. It gives us more control over what we're working with. But here's the problem. If I go to, let's say I make a circle for an FK controller, okay, and I'm just gonna go ahead and point snap it up to this joint, all right. What I can do is I'm gonna turn off my polygons. Where are you, polygons? There you go. Boop. That was not what I was looking for. Turn off polygons. I could point snap it here, okay? And what I could do is rotate it like this, okay? And then I could, don't worry about this, I'm just going to do this real quick. Constraint and orient, oops. Constraint and, let's say parent. Okay. I could now grab that, and you can see I can rotate it. That's great. But the problem is, notice that it has these values on here, okay? So if I ever want to zero it out, I can't because it has to have these values. So what I could do is this, right? I could take this, rotate in the orientation I want, and then I want to zero it out, right? All you got to do is then just do modify, freeze transformation, zero it out. But what you're going to notice is this might be this orientation, but now that object is not the orientation of the arm. You see how it doesn't go, like if I hit W, see how it doesn't go down towards the arm like I want? Okay? That's what I want to do. I want it to go down. But as soon as I do that, as soon as I modify freeze transformations, it's going to zero it out again, and it's going to go back to world transforms, which is no good. So the way to do this is basically this. Whenever you freeze transforms, what it does is it looks at the parent, and that becomes its orientation. It zeroes out to what's above it. So, for example, let's say I take a cube. I'm just going to turn polygons back on. And when I go, and let's say I orient it like this, so you can see that's my, so when I go to rotate and Y, you can see, right, that's great. But as soon as I freeze the transforms, modify, freeze transforms. It's going to look at what's above it, and what's above it is the world. However, let's say I make another one of these, Control D. Okay. If I take this, and let's just rotate it like this, right? So it's got this dirty value here. You can disregard this thing. Just this is the only one I really care about. If I take this and I parent it to it, so I select this, I hit Shift P and then hit P. So now if I select this, you can see that's parented to it. You'll notice that this was 0 before. That rotates. Like watch, if I select this and hit Shift P to unparent it, see how it's zeroed out? It's not parented to this. See how it's zeroed out? The rotates? But if I select this and parent it to it, now it's looking at the parent and it's, oh, I'm 59 degrees off. See how this one's this? Because to it, its parent is its world, just like my children. It thinks whatever its parent... You ever see like a really weird kid, right? And you're like, oh, that kid's really weird. And then you meet their parents and you're like, that's why they're weird. It's because they think whatever's normal is what's above them, right? And what they understand as being normal is their family environment. It's the same thing here. So if I freeze the transforms of this now, modify freeze transforms, it's going to zero out its rotations, but now you can see it has the same orientation as the parent does. Because to it, the thing above it, its world, is this. Now, you're going to see that this object still has this. Because maybe that kid looks up and he's like, this is normal to be weird. The parent that lives in the world knows that they're weird. At least I hope so anyway. So this is still going to have, if I zero this out, if I do modify freeze transforms, that'll zero out. You'll see it becomes world. And now they have a normal parent, but now this kid is now also going to have that same orientation. Okay? So that's how we're going to solve the problem. You're going to see in a second. Basically, we're going to have an object above that's going to hold the dirty values, but then the child will be nice and clean and zeroed out. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Go ahead and do show, turn polygons off. Okay. We're going to start, we're just going to do this arm. We're going to do the shoulder or clavicle, shoulder, elbow, and wrist. Okay. So what I want you to do is have nothing selected and hit Control G. If you remember, Control G when you have something selected makes a group, right? So if I select two things and hit Control G, it puts them into a group. So just to show you, let's say I have, like if I have both of these selected and hit Control G, you can see now they are both part of this group, and I can move both of them. You can't see them because I don't have polygons available at the moment, but they're both part of that group. Okay, so that's what it does. But if you have nothing selected and hit Control G, it makes a null group, which basically just means an empty nothing. Okay, so you're gonna make a null, and then what you're gonna do is call this null the clavicle underscore L underscore NULL. So we'll call it the clavicle left null. All right. Now what I want you to do is hold V for point snap and snap it up to the clavicle. That's not the clavicle. This. So snap it up to the clavicle. So what I want is for this clavicle to be the same orientation, meaning the same when I hit rotate or W, the same as this. So if you look, they're actually not too far off. But basically, I want this to be the same as that. So let me see. Let me open this up so you can chest controller. Oh, you're not what I was hoping for. Root. Spine, 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 spine. Arm. Okay, so this guy. So just so you get an idea, because I want you to see that they are in fact different. Ugh, let's frame. Come on. There we go. So there's this. You can see it's pretty close to world space. And then where's the group? Right there. And this. See how this is a little bit off? Do you see it? Watch. When I click on the other one. Here. See? See how it shifted a little bit? So this isn't quite the same as world, but whenever you make a new object, it's automatically at world orientation. So if you see, this is perfectly straight with world, this null group. So I want to make it the same orientation as basically this here. So to do that, we're going to use an orient constraint. So I'm going to show you what that is real quick. So let's go to show. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing you. So to do that, basically, you create. So let's do this. I'm just going to use 2 cubes as another example. Okay. So there's different constraints. So just like I was telling you, when you parent something, right, it moves like you would expect it to. I'm sure you're familiar with parenting. An orient constraint, what that does is that it doesn't need to be in a hierarchical order. Like you see how like this joint is parented to this joint, which is parented to this joint, which is parented to this joint. See how there's a hierarchy? You can have, and like if I took this cube and I parented to this cube, you can see that now it's underneath that hierarchy, right? And so when I rotate this, it moves, and when I move it, it moves with it, and when I scale it, it scales with it, okay? Now, what you can do instead is something called a constraint, okay? And there's different ones. So if you see here it says constraint, so there's parent, point, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so a point constraint basically will do a sort of parenting, but based on position. So what you do is you select the thing you want to do the constraining, and then the constrainee. Okay, so and then you would do this. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to click on maintain offset. That just means that if I don't click on this and I apply it, it's going to snap to the position of this object, wherever this object may be. So if I select this, shift select this, and apply, it's going to snap to it because it's going to be the exact same position as that. But if instead I maintain offset and apply, now what you're going to see is I can rotate this guy and I can scale this guy. But if I go to move it, that will also move with it. So it's sort of like selective parenting, but also you will see it's not. It doesn't. You can have something in a totally different hierarchy affect something else. Okay. So what we're going to do is, oops, let me just get rid of that constraint. So what we're going to do is this. We're not going to use a point constraint. We are going to use an orient constraint. So if I select this, shift select that, and go constraint orient, you're going to see it's going to snap to the exact same orientation as the constrainer. And watch, it will rotate with it as well, which is actually how we're going to do a bunch of the FK controllers, okay? So that was what I wanted to show you. Now let's actually, come on, and let's go to show polygons off, and let's actually apply this. All right, so this clavicle, I want it to be the same orientation as this. So to do that, I'm going to select the joint first, then shift select, or you might have to hit control when you're in here. Actually, hit control and click, or it might be command click if it's a Mac, I'm not sure. Select this, and then go constrain. Where are you at? Constrain, orient. And now what you're going to see is when I select this clavicle, let's frame on that. When I select this clavicle null group, it is the same orientation as, where are you at? My arm, watch, right here. Okay. Great. Okay. So, which is good. All right. That's fine. Where's my null? Here it is. Now what I want to do is, you see it makes this orient constraint node. I just wanted to snap it to the same. I don't actually want it to be there. So underneath it, just go ahead and delete that. So it still will be in the same position. You can see it moved it and it rotated it. So it's the same as this joint. But I don't actually want that when I rotate the joint to affect it. Okay. Now what we're going to do is, we have that set up. Now what we need to do is make a controller curve. So create NURBS primitives, just do a circle. And I'm just going to use that. Let's go ahead and in the attribute editor, just do enable, object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and then just choose a color. I'm just going to do yellow. Boom. Okay. All right, so I'm take that, and I'm going to hold V for point snap, snap it up to that joint, and then just go ahead and, rotate it so it makes sense. I'm going to show polygons, and I am going to scale this like this, kind of, that way I can get to it from the front and the back. Okay, so it's just like that. That looks fine. If you can see it, hopefully you can see it. Okay, I'm going to go show, turn polygons back off so it's out of the way. All right. Now, I want, again, you can see the orientation of this. See what this looks like? That's not what I want. But if I take that NURBS circle, let's go ahead and rename it first. I'm going to go to channel box, and we'll just name it clavicle controller underscore L underscore CRV. Okay, now I can see what it is. I'm going to take that, I'm going to click and just drag it, middle mouse button drag it, middle mouse button drag it onto that. Okay, so now that is parented to that null. And watch what's going to happen. So, come on. So you see what this looks like, right? Now what we're going to do is going to modify freeze transformation, and it's become the same orientation. See how the manipulator, the same orientation as that null group above it, because that's what it's parented to. Okay? Now, it doesn't actually do anything yet. When I rotate it, nothing happens. So now we actually want to take this and make it rotate this. And to do that, we're just going to use that orient constraint again. So select the controller, shift select the arm joint, and go constraint, orient. And now, when you go to rotate it, it will rotate that arm. Okay, or the shoulder in this case. Okay? Yay! Alright, now, we need to do the same thing like a million times over. Alright, so let's do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do one at a time going this way, and then kind of go from there. Okay, so first I need to make the null controller, or the null group. So I'm going to have nothing selected at Control G to make a null, and we'll call this shoulder underscore L underscore null. Okay, so I made that. I'm going to hit the W and hold V and middle mouse button. Okay, hold V for point snap. Snap it up to my shoulder here. Okay, now this is meant to hold the orientation of this for me. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to select this joint, hit Control to select this null over here, right? And then we're going to go constraint, orient, and that's going to automatically snap this null to be the same orientation. Okay, but I don't actually want to keep that. I'm going to get rid of it because now I have successfully made it. I've successfully made it the orientation, but I don't want this arm to actually move it anymore. I just wanted it to get it to that initial orientation, the right orientation. Okay, now I need to make the actual controller. So I'm just going to go create NURBS primitives, circle, and we're going to go to the attribute editor, enable overrides. I'm just going to make it yellow again. You could choose whatever colors you want. That makes you feel good. Alright, going to go to the channel box and rename this one the shoulder controller underscore L underscore CRV. Great. And yeah, and then we're going to hold V for point snap, like that. Point snap it up there. That's fine. I'm going to go show polygon so I can see how big it's got to be. I'm just going to rotate it roughly how I want it to look. It doesn't actually have to be at the same orientation. I'm just make sure it looks good. It looks adequate. That's good. I'm going to go show polygons, turn it back off just so it's easier to work with. Okay, but you can see it has these dirty values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent it. Middle mouse button, click and drag it to the null. So the shoulder controller curve is parented to the null curve. Okay, and now so that it inherits the parent's orientation, I'm just going to go modify freeze transformation, and now it has that same orientation. See how the manipulator is in the same orientation? Okay, good. And now what we're going to do is you're going to take this and you're going to select the curve because we want to actually control this. Right now it doesn't do anything. Okay, select the curve, shift select the arm joint, and just do constraint, orient. And now when I rotate this, it'll rotate the shoulder. All right, and let's do it 2 more times, and then we'll do the other side even quicker, okay? So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to Control D to duplicate it, because it's easier than making a new one and doing all that. Bring it down here, and you can see it's parented underneath this still. So with it selected, if I hit Shift P, that will unparent it. So now you see, if I minimize this one, you see it's not parented to those anymore. So I hit Shift P to unparent it. Make sure it's point snap, that's good. I'm going to go show polygons so I can see what it looks like. And I didn't do a good job placing that elbow. And I'm just going to try and get it to look the way I want. And I'm going to scale it down. Like that, we'll say. That's good enough. And I'm going to rename it. And it won't be shoulder, it will be elbow. Elbow. Alright. That is acceptable. I also need to make, so let's do show, and let's go ahead and make the other one too, actually. So I'm just going to duplicate this, Control D, W, I'm going to hold V, let's show polygons up again, V for point snap. Alright, get it down to the wrist. Let's try and orient it, like just, just so it looks good. It doesn't actually need to be perfect in any way. Show polygons. We just want to make it so it's easy to select. So let's make it a little bit smaller. Okay, good. So I just want to be able to click on them. That's the only idea. I mean, you can make them as big or small as you like. Okay. So, and let's rename this one. Make sure you take the 1 out afterwards too. I don't think I did on the other one. So we'll call this one wrist controller underscore CRV. And I did take it out. Okay, so we already did the shoulder, so I just made the elbow and the wrist. Okay, so we made the curves. They don't actually do anything yet, but they're there. Let's go show, turn polygons back off. Okay, now we need to make those null groups. So I have nothing selected. Hit Control G and W and V for point snap. Point snap it up to the elbow here. Just rename it elbow. Elbow, come on, elbow underscore L underscore NULL. Okay, and I'm just going to Control D and hold V for point snap it down there. Great. So now that's point snapped. And we will rename this one. So I just duplicated the null group. We'll rename this one a wrist null. Okay. So now we've got the pieces. I've got an elbow controller, a wrist controller curve, and I've got the elbow null group, and I've got the wrist null group. Okay? So now what I want to do is make this all work. So let's start with the elbow. So I'm going to select the joint. I want this controller curve to be the same orientation as. So I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to control click the elbow null and do constraint orient. Okay? So now the null is in the same position. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and delete that orient constraint. It's very important that you do that. I'll show you in a second. Well, actually, you know what? Let's leave it on there so I can show you why. Actually, delete it now. I'll show you on the next one. Okay, so I have this one there. So now what I need to do is I need to parent this curve to that null, to the elbow null. Right? So you just middle mouse button click and drag that onto the empty group. With it still selected, do modify, freeze transformations. Okay, so now this is the same orientation. Okay, okay, same orientation. And now with this still selected, select this, shift select this joint, go constraint, orient, and again now when I rotate this, it will work. Okay. All right, and we're going to do the same thing down here. Okay, so select the wrist null group. I want it to be the same as this wrist joint. So select the wrist joint, control click that null group, constraint, orient. Okay, I'm going to leave the orientation on just so you can see how it flips out. I'm going to save this real quick first. Control S, continue. Should be saving all along, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to leave that on there, but you're going to see why this is going to mess up in a second. So then what I want to do is I want to take the wrist controller and parent it to the null group. So I'm just middle mouse button, click and drag it onto it. Okay. Now with that still selected, go modify freeze transformations. And you can see it's the same orientation as the wrist now. Then select this, select the controller curve, shift select the joint, and do constraint orient. And you'll be like, that's weird, but watch. Want to see something really neat? What is going on? So here's the problem. Oh, it undid it. Sometimes it doesn't undo. Okay. So I'm going to delete that guy. And this doesn't control anything, right? Is this oriented now? Okay. So what I want you to do is basically delete that orientation of the delete the orientation, and then what I want you to do is select this controller curve, shift select this, and do constraint orient. Okay, and now it'll work fine. So what's happening is this. The reason why I have to delete that null one is that when I go to rotate this, I have a constraint that tells this joint to rotate, right? That's how it's working. Like this is saying, when you move, move this. The problem is, if you don't take the constraint from this to that null group, what will happen is that this joint will tell this null to rotate, which if you remember, this null is the parent of the curve. So when it tells that null to rotate, it rotates the curve, which tells the joints to rotate, which tells the null to rotate, which tells the curve to rotate, which tells the joint. You can see what goes on, and you get like a cyclic redundancy. All right. So basically, that's what happened. All right. So I'm gonna minimize that. All right. So now, if you look, we got FK on all these pieces. Pretty cool. So let's save that, and let's see if we can, I don't know, try to do something a little bit easier. So let's minimize that. Okay, I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna select this one. I'm gonna hold Shift, and let's select all of these, and hit Control G to make a group. You can probably see where we're gonna go with this one. Now, Control D to duplicate that group, and then -1 on X, -1. And you can see that we took that group and we duplicated it. Okay? So basically there's a group of these and a group of these, and I just took the second one and made it -X, so it flipped it. Flipped it like this. Okay? We did -1 on X. Now, we can't actually do it like that. That's no good, and also it's not hooked up. So open up the first group, select all these, and hit Shift P. So they're not part of that group 3. And then take group 3 and just delete it. I don't want those inside that group. I only did it so I could duplicate it for this other group. Select the ones inside of that group. We need to change it from L's to R's. So with those selected, go modify, search and replace names. Search for _L_, and replace with _R_, and hit replace. And now you see, they'll say clavicle R null, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Select those 4 nulls here that are underneath group 4. Hit Shift P to remove them. Delete that group. So now you have all of these outside of that as well. And now you need to actually hook those up. So they should be actually the same orientation now that I think about it. But it's not going to quite work the way that we want. Because unfortunately, let me see something. You see how the scale Z is -1, and then scale Z -1? Because we did it all by mirroring it, it's actually going to be like not right. You can't just assign it. Like if I it might even work, but it's not going to work right. So if I select this and then go like this and do constraint, don't do this. Orient. Okay. It'll sort of work, but you see how, yeah, it's, you know what, it's actually not too bad. I wonder if we get away with that. I feel like you should do that, though. I feel like it's going to haunt me down the line. You know what, let's try it, see what happens. I'm going to pause it and see if this will work. I'm just going to go with it. Okay, so we'll take this, and so select this, shift select the joint, constraint, orient, select this, shift select this joint, constraint, and orient. Okay, so now if you look, you can see we can rotate these, but there's a weirdness to it that you may or may not have noticed, that when I go to rotate this, notice that that arm stays straight. It's not rotating with it like in a normal way. The reason being is that this rotation, see how it's blue here? That means it's spoken for. That is still being controlled by this, whether this gets moved or not. So what we need to do is actually parent each one of these to each other down the line. So what that means is this. I want to select the wrist. I don't want to select the wrist controller. I want the null wrist, the thing above it. So select the wrist null, then shift select the elbow controller. So select the wrist null over here. Don't just click on the controller. That's the controller curve. I want the null. See how it says null? And then shift select the curve here and hit P. Now you're going to notice that this is now parented with it, and when I rotate it, it rotates that. Okay? Now same thing here. I don't want this curve, I want the null. So if I select the curve and hit the up arrow, it goes to the null, because that's the next thing up in the hierarchy. Then shift select this curve and hit P. So now again, when I rotate this, it will rotate it. So same thing here. I'm going to select the curve, hit the up arrow, and then shift select this and hit P. So now when I do the shoulder, it will rotate that. And when I select this, it'll rotate this. And you can see it works like you would expect it to. We're going to do the same thing over here. Select this, hit the up arrow. So I have the null. Shift select this, hit P. Okay. So select this, hit the up arrow so I get the null. Shift select this, P. Again. Select this, up arrow so I have the null. Shift select the curve, I want the controller curve, and hit P. Alright. And now let's go to show polygons. So now you can see when I rotate this, it rotates his arm in a very disgusting weird way. When I rotate this, it'll rotate his arm. And when I do this, it'll do the same thing. Okay. But now we have FK controllers. Okay. And what are we at? 32. Oof. Okay. So I would just do the same thing for the neck and head joints, but we're already at half an hour, and I really don't want to do too awful much, so maybe I'll do the head on a different video or something. But we're getting the pieces. So now we have legs, we have a spine, and we have arms. So next, I guess, would be the head and kind of going from there. But it's going. Oh, we also got to do the hands, but we're gonna do the hands a little bit differently as well.